Welcome to the Longevity Protocol with Dr. Cristina Bosch and Dr. John A. Robinson. We'll be your guides to uncovering the secrets to optimal health, better sex, and happiness. From debunking aging myths to exploring the science behind what it means to live the Longevity Protocol, we'll dive into a wide range of topics. So, get ready for an exhilarating journey in what it means to live well and feel your very best at any age.
I think it's important to make sure in life, just in general, live a moderate type of life. I mean, it winds up being an answer to so many different things in moderation.
Yeah.
That concept. What do you think?
Yes, I think that's true. I think that a little bit of everything is a good idea. I think, and moderation doesn't always mean that you're floating in the middle. You know, there's what is the average net? Sometimes you have moments of extremes, but they're on polar opposite ends, so they balance each other out.
Sure.
But in general, I would say that that's true, that I think that having little bits of everything and, you're balancing that concept of having control and not being uptight, like just a little bit of everything. Yeah.
And I think that's really true in medicine. I think we've learned this over the years, how we're working with patients and dealing with them. I talked about on a different episode about alcohol and moderation.
Right.
Meeting the patient where they're at in order to help lead them to what is going to be the best decision for them. So there has to be that approach of moderation in medicine as well.
Yeah.
You can't just say it's only this thing. I mean, at least I think that's largely what we tend to think. Certainly, we're both naturopathic doctors, and we have seen militant approaches to medicine far more than what now we're seeing all kinds of health content out there now. And a lot of people are pretty strict about how they're approaching things within medicine. And we just don't approach it that way, even though we're pretty clear on a lot of things. But we meet the patient where they're at in order to help. Because in the end, this is about humans.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it's about people. That's why we're doing it. Are we doing it just for the sake of the facts? Or are we doing it for the sake of the
Right.
person and where they're at in their lives and helping to guide them to what's going to be the best possible outcome for them?
Yeah. And when we talk about longevity, you and I have mentioned this on more than one occasion. We're not talking about longevity for the purpose of data points. We're talking about longevity so that people can be living longer, love-filled, well-lived life, like we like to say. It's funny what you're saying about the extremes. We were talking about this the other day, you and I, which I don't know that it's necessarily related to our topic, but you brought it up, so I'm going to mention it, about how the pendulum is swinging. The pendulum is swinging with regards to what we're seeing for health advocacy and
Yes, very exciting.
personal responsibility. We're very excited about that.
Mhm.
But what you and I were noting was, is the pendulum swinging so far to the other side that now we're freaking missing the point again?
It usually does. I mean, that's part of what
Right.
that ebb and flow is in life.
And that's so ridiculous. As we go through this episode and we talk about this notion of moderation, I think what we really want to keep in mind is common sense medicine.
Yes.
How you practice common sense medicine for yourself or as a practitioner is keeping an open mind. Don't say no to the things you're afraid of because you don't know them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, what else here? So I'm glad what you just said there about, how we approach the idea of a well-lived life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of the word longevity is actually about living.
Right.
So are we living and that's the difference between lifespan and health span.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that we actually have a health span, and part of that is living a well-lived life,
Right.
making sure you actually can experience life, not just, well, I'm older, I've added some years to this whole thing, but I'm actually kind of debilitated and I'm stuck in a bed or I can't really move or whatever, but I'm living longer.
Right. Or I'm lonely and miserable.
Yes.
I mean, again, it's a difference between living and existing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yes, longevity, and what you just said there, and I think what we're both talking about, longevity is definitely about accessibility as we age. Can we actually access our loved ones? Can we access our passions as we're aging? And that's one of the reasons why movement is so important. It's one of the reasons why we generally say muscle is so important, because it allows you to go in and figure out your moderation in what it is that you're passionate about. I think it's so incredibly important. So I wanted to, and you said earlier about the facts, so I'm gonna spit some facts,
Yes.
Because I
Well, what I said was data. We're not just living it to collect data points.
No, but I like data. So
yes, okay, yes, I do too. I mean, I like informed decisions.
Yes,
I think informed, and sometimes. My little tangent here. Sometimes we have all the information that says A and we say B. And I'm okay with that sometimes too, as long as it's within moderation.
Right. Because the data doesn't always, it doesn't always perfectly point as much as we want it to, especially when we're talking about humans.
Mm-hmm.
We've said this before that, in biology, they consider biology a soft science.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Chemistry, mathematics, they consider those hard sciences. 1 + 1 is pretty much always going to equal 2. But when you're dealing with a human, you would think all the data is pointing to A, but actually B was the right choice. B was the thing, or maybe it still could have been both, and B still worked out well, all right. Even though A was,
yeah.
Well, so again, to the idea of some level of facts, and I think this is important because it speaks to this idea of moderation. In the field of longevity, there's something called mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. And this is sort of a genetic component in our bodies that tell our cells to either, it tells our cells to be either anabolic. If mTOR is stimulated, it is telling us to become anabolic, meaning growth, building. And that's important. You have to have some level of that. But also, it will block autophagy. Now, so when we're talking about longevity, kind of back up here and let everybody understand. When we're talking about longevity, one of the really hot topics, and there's truth to it for sure, is the idea of fasting and how fasting will allow us to literally self-digest in a good way, meaning we get rid of all the debris, and autophagy. It means self sort of eating, but eating all the stuff that's the debris. It's getting rid of the junk.
Right.
Exactly. So autophagy is really, really important for us in general in health. It is very important when it comes to longevity. This is true. I think it's very clear. But this idea of mTOR, to where what people are essentially doing in the longevity, and they've been doing it for years. Again, this is all really hot here lately, but I've seen this now for years regarding mTOR. They want to just block mTOR. We want to stay on autophagy. We want to make sure, because that's what's going to help us to live longer. The mice studies that they've done from years and years ago about saying low calories, calorie deprivation is what's going to help those mice live longer.
Right.
Now, I don't know necessarily how well they were living, but they lived longer. This is true. And in part, it's because they are blocking mTOR and keeping you out of an anabolic state and more into this autophagy. So what's interesting about a lot of these people that I've noticed over the years, even though people are talking more about protein and muscle, I have seen a lot of these people that are very obsessed with making sure they're in autophagy. They're not necessarily the most robust of people. They focus so much on autophagy that they actually don't have a lot of muscle. They don't have a lot of resilience to disease, therefore, ironically.
There's too much breaking down.
There's too much breaking down. There's too much focus on autophagy. So, all things, under heaven when in time, and it's got to be when it's supposed to be there. So the pendulum has to actually swing back and forth, perhaps on a daily basis, on a seasonal basis. It has to go back and forth. So there has to be moments where you're not in autophagy and you're actually in some form of anabolism, and you're growing and you're pulling in nutrients and you're actually growing tissue. That's going to be incredibly important. So I think it's important for those out there that might understand what I'm saying about mTOR, for those in the longevity space that are interested in that, know that there needs to be a balance with this concept. I'm speaking from a physiological standpoint, that there has to be balance there.
Because the idea is that cells in the body can sometimes go dormant. They stop being metabolically active. And when they're dormant, they can then start to attract too much oxidative or inflammatory processes. So what these longevity experts, some in the longevity field are saying, if we're constantly stimulating that, like you said, eating of self, what you're doing is it's like a vacuum cleaner. You're going in there and you're constantly vacuum cleaning out those cells that are dormant. But our perspective is that if you're always in a breakdown perspective, then you're never really practicing prevention. So I do think that to a certain extent, you're actually potentially promoting more dormant cells. Whereas if you're cycling through this idea of anabolic and catabolic, building, breakdown, inflammation, anti-inflammation,
Right.
inflammation, anti-inflammation, that's really where the beauty of nature or human body lies, where it's balancing itself between breakdown and build up, and that we shouldn't ever linger in one state for too long.
Fully agreed. So, and you had said this earlier too, I do think that it's important to have people in the extremes once in a while. You were saying before, it was almost like the balance is from one extreme to even an extreme, one end of the bell curve to all the way to the other end of the bell curve. But I think it's important in terms of, let's say, all of the pioneers that are out there that usually are they self-experiment. They're the ones that are kind of figuring it out. And then they come up with their hypothesis, and they're out there and they're promoting their hypothesis, and they're saying this is the way it needs to be. And it can seem quite militant in its approach, but those people are the ones that also at the same time bring light to a lot of things.
They're expanding the frontiers.
They are. And they're the ones that are, hey, they're going to die on that hill. And that's the one that's the approach that they're going for. But you can learn out of that.
Right.
I always bring up this idea of why we know so much about testosterone replacement therapy, particularly in men. That is because of guys using anabolic steroids.
Right. I talk about that all the time.
I mean, it's
the bodybuilding world.
Yeah, these guys they've been experimenting since really the 70s.
Yeah.
It goes back a long time of understanding and figuring it out. And they have brought a lot of that forward when medicine was saying, no. Yeah. And then they're laughing their asses off going, no, yes. This actually is doing something. And here's why. And granted, they were quite, focused in their particular hypothesis, and it was for a different reason. And there was a lot of things that they did and still do that are incredibly unhealthy, but there was truth into what they were saying. So you have to kind of, you have to cheer on some of these extremists sometimes to an extent, while you take it with a grain of salt and figure out what's going to be best for you in terms of this moderate approach towards health.
And even for the individual, just like the average individual who's not experimenting with extremes for the purposes of expanding scientific frontiers. If you're curious about fasting, fast. If you're curious about high protein, high fat, go for it. Like if you're having any sort of an inkling, if your intuition is driving you, or if your curiosity is there, I always say, give it a go. I think it's best if you give it a go with some kind of support from my input, but fasting is a wonderful tool for increasing health, wellness, longevity, metabolism. It's a great technique for people who are undergoing chemotherapy, for epileptics, I believe.
Epilepsy to some degree, it is. It's actually through ketosis. It's the ketones, but that ketosis process is actually part of the fasting process.
Right.
You go into ketosis, and it's those ketones that are beneficial for the brain for those who have epilepsy.
Yeah, but it's not good for the person who's got adrenal dysfunction. It's not good for the person who's so stressed that they're prone to hypoglycemic episodes or blood sugar dips. Like those techniques that are extreme serve a purpose. It's just not necessarily going to serve you, or not you in this season of your life.
Right. Yeah, that's it. That's where it really becomes difficult for people when they're listening about some new piece of information and they see somebody doing something in a certain way. Back to the whole bodybuilder thing, which is kind of funny. I was reading those bodybuilding magazines when I was a kid back in the 80s, and you'd look at the diets, like what was the bodybuilder doing? What was he eating? And you would see the diet and you would try to sort of mimic what he was doing, or particularly his training regimen. And this was because he was on steroids. So, but you didn't think about it that way.
Right.
Like you didn't understand that it was, they were able to do it in that way. So it was never going to apply. So sometimes I think people are presenting these concepts and it's unique to them and what they've maybe figured out for themselves. And it's not necessarily going to apply to you.
Or the concept is right, but not the tools that they use it. Like, they're not necessarily caring what calories they're putting in. They don't care what the quality of the calorie is. They're just saying, shovel it in. Remember that article or that story you read to me about that bodybuilder? He was like, you want to put on muscle? Eat, eat the pizza, eat the tuna fish, eat the chips, eat the burger, just eat.
What was funny about it is that there was like this young kid, and he went up to this huge, power lifter, and what he was asking is like, I want you to tell me, what should I do?
Right.
And he said, oh, you want to know?
Right.
And he brought him out all the way out into the parking lot, and like he thought he was ready to hear like the mysteries of the world right there. He was going to tell him the real secret, and he just said, eat. I mean, it wasn't
when you don't want to eat.
Right. When you think you had enough, eat more. Right. Yeah.
And maybe don't eat the pizza, don't eat the chips, but it is true that most people are under eating. I mean, I had, what was it? Tuesday. I think Tuesday was a day of skinny fat patients. I think I had 8 patients in a row. I even posted on Instagram about it. I'm like, the entire day was me talking to patients about they're not eating. Yeah. Oh, you're not feeling as well as you could. You're not eating. Oh, you're not sleeping well. You're not eating. Okay. We went through 8 patients. I think it was of not eating.
For the audience.
Skinny fat is people who perhaps have a weight that is, the number itself is desirable, or the person is happy themselves with the weight that they're at, but they're mostly fatty. They're not strong enough. They're not lean enough. They're quite frankly just not healthy enough.
So low muscle, high fat.
Low muscle, high fat.
That winds up just being a wash, and their weight is
correct,
okay,
and their weight is controlled.
But they actually have a lot of fat relative to low muscle. Yeah.
And as I was posting about it on Instagram, because I said I spent the whole day talking to people about how they don't eat, and I literally worked through lunch. I had eaten nothing that whole day. So, when I think about this story about the bodybuilder, okay, I just need to, I want to put on muscle, freaking eat more.
Yeah.
That's why moderation is sometimes a balance of extremes. Sometimes you fast, sometimes you eat a lot, but the net effect is somewhere in the middle.
I remember in medical school, we had a nutrition class, and one of the topics of the class was eat the cookie.
Yeah, that was a good lesson.
And that idea, and I think it was important. It was a good lesson because, again, naturopathic doctors, naturopathic students, they can become particularly, again, quite militant in their approach and saying it's this way or no other way. And, we have a lot of amazing ideas. We have a lot of tools and a lot of strategies that we're taught and that we understand. And you can become sort of a victim of all of those strategies in terms of trying to implement all that in your life. And what he was saying was sometimes you have to just eat the cookie. Mm-hmm. Sometimes take a break from your supplements. Sometimes take a break from the regimen itself, because that in itself will moderate, and that also would help to expand life.
Yeah, it's a pattern interruption, and the body is quite wise, so it does adapt quickly. When you're sticking with the same routine over and over and over again, 365 times years, 365 days times several years, the body adapts. It establishes a new homeostasis. It establishes a new baseline of norm, and then getting out of that position will be extremely difficult if you don't change something. It's part of the reason why I say I'm a big fan of seasonal adjustments. I think if you're eating with the seasons, supplementing with the seasons, changing your physical activity with the seasons, you will find that nature is giving you a really good guideline of when to do something differently.
Yeah. And, we were saying before about fasting and how important that is. It's, you can fast throughout the day, meaning the concept of intermittent fasting. You can fast to where you ate in the day, but then you ate in a certain window. That's the concept of intermittent fasting. But then you can do it in a seasonal way. And I think probably one of the best ways to do a 1 to 3 day fast where you don't eat anything is probably once every season, kind of literally preparing yourself for the next season by getting rid of some of that debris and resetting your whole system for now this new season.
I have, as you know, I had so many, and still have so many just amazing Israeli friends. And they were Jews, Israeli Jews, and they would follow their religious holidays. And I would comment on how, as I was going through my nutrition and dietetics studies in college, and I was I was like the only, what would they say, Goyim? I was like the only non-Jew of the group, how those religious fasts were in tune often with when it would be an appropriate time for the body to just do a reset. And I know this isn't unique just to Jews. I think Muslims themselves also
Yeah.
have. And even Catholics, it's not followed as much, but there are those religious rules, and they were there. They were set there in large part because they were setting a healthy balance for the masses of people.
Mhm.
That's very interesting. There are built-in times throughout the calendar, throughout the seasons, where fasting really is appropriate.
Mhm. And yeah, there's so much in the Bible about that. I mean, the idea of not just fasting for cleansing, but enemas. I mean,
Yeah.
there's actually those types of concepts there that are innate, that are designed, of course, perhaps from a religious standpoint, but for health, so you can become closer to God.
Yeah. We were listening to that pod this morning. What was it? Jillian Michaels, right? And she
Yeah,
had that. I'm not sure who the woman was.
I think she was some expert MD.
Okay, because I was only hearing, you were listening to it, I was hearing it in the background. But she said something about how there's no greater feeling, or what a great feeling it is when your stomach is empty.
Yeah.
And I was like, what feeling? The feeling is horrible for me, because not everyone's a good candidate for fasting, and even if we're referencing those religions, even they have built-in exceptions. Like if you're under 12, or if you're elderly, or if you're pregnant, you've got to do these things responsibly. You can't be fanatic. That's part of that
Yeah.
moderation concept.
Let me speak a little bit to that, since you brought that up, and we'll put some other layers of facts into that.
I mean, just versus it's horrible.
Always have a filled stomach. No, you really should. But I mean, first of all, that's why they call breakfast. I mean,
Right,
it is actually
you're
breaking the fast. So at the barest minimum, no matter what, everybody goes some level of hours without something in their stomach. But probably the sweet spot, just in general, without getting, again, militant with it, it's somewhere around 12 to 14 hours of a fast. And you can stay into that. You actually get certain levels of autophagy, not deep autophagy, where you're cleaning up that debris, but you do get some levels of it.
You get the good daily maintenance.
Yeah, you get resilience
Mhm.
out of actually doing that. Again, I think that's part back to the religious concepts. This helps us to stay focused. You're actually literally more mentally focused up to a point in the midst of fasting.
Uh-huh.
It turns on certain hormones that actually make you sharper. So that's something that certainly during the work week for me, well, the work week, when I say that's why I work every day, but
Yeah.
let's say Monday through Friday, I have really learned to not have early breakfast. I
Right.
will have maybe some level of protein in a protein powder, a little bit of creatine, and coffee. But outside of that, I usually don't have anything
Mhm.
first thing in the morning, and my first meal's right around noon, and I stay sharper in the morning when I
Mhm.
do that. I've learned that over time. That wasn't the case when I was younger. If I wouldn't have eaten when I was younger, it just wasn't good
Right.
for me personally.
Right. So sticking to topic, this is a very easy implementable tool for the listener, is that idea of you can practice daily fasting by simply going those 12 to 16 hours after dinner. You don't have anything else until you have a breakfast.
Mhm.
It reminds me of what you see on social media when they say, I was today years old when I learned that breakfast means break the fast.
Right.
I think that that's a great, great tool. I cannot do that. And I will often tell patients, I wake up very hungry.
Mhm.
It's enough that I wait the hour after taking my thyroid to eat something.
Mhm.
And some people have disrupted sleep. So if you find that in the middle of the night, you're stirring, you're being basically aroused to alertness, a lot of times it's because they're having a dip in that blood sugar. So having some sort of a snack 30 to 60 minutes before bed for people that's fat and protein heavy will help their sleep be better.
Mhm.
But it's a little bit like you said about the coffee, just a small something, you're
Right.
still aiding in that fast.
Yes. Well, I think the summary here is that you had said this earlier too, that health is about being conscious to the moment. It's about focusing on yourself and how your whole experience relates back to your whole life. I mean, you have to stay conscious with it. If you don't, I think so many times people are they're just doing things in a rote way, and they just stay focused and conscious about what they're doing. That in itself becomes potentially healthy, depending on what they're doing. Again, we talked about alcohol in another episode.
Yeah, I've seen lately experts saying that they don't believe that everything in moderation is a good philosophy, that it's a philosophy of weakness. And I would greatly challenge that. I would say that what I hope we're demonstrating today is that it depends on how you're defining the word moderation, and that ultimately if you're putting balance in place of moderation, which I think one can, that you will find the best health outcomes and the most enjoyment in your longevity.
Yeah, it's funny when you say that too, that there are so many of these health, we'll call them fads, and I don't mean that to sound derogatory about these concepts, like I say, being in ketosis can be looked at as a fad. It certainly was maybe about 5 to 7 years ago.
They definitely get trendy.
Yeah, it gets trendy. I mean, that's just what people are focused on at the moment. And I have seen, let's use ketosis actually as an example. So people getting into ketosis, they're doing this high fat, low protein, very, very low carbohydrate diet. And they were like, no, you just stay in ketosis forever.
Right.
And the experts were quite convinced of that. And now you will see a more moderate approach to ketosis. Many of those same experts are like, well, I come in and out of ketosis. Well, you need a certain amount. Dr. Mercola is one of them. I saw him sort of change his position over time. So, nutritional science, wow, talk about something that is constantly changing and opinions are changing about it. But again, the people that are just absolutely convinced about a particular approach themselves will change over time. So really the overall answer would have been, well, moderation along the way usually almost always is going to be part of the answer.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the experts. The experts, science and health experts, including us, right? It's a business. No matter what, these are people that have a business in selling their expertise. And it's just like, what's the paint color of the year, or what's the fashion trend, or the home decor trend, or the superfood of the year. Like, these are all trends because it's what drives the business of living. What you and I are putting out there is reminding patients, pick a diet, any diet. Ketosis, okay. Juicing, okay. Whatever, intermittent fasting, okay. They all have value. They all have a place. But when you're talking about the day-to-day, the longevity, the practice of a well-lived life, what we're talking about is living a life with moderation, where you implement these more extreme tools when necessary to achieve a specific goal.
Right. And you're staying conscious throughout the process. You're not ignoring your health. I think that's one of the big things. People ignore how they're feeling.
Yeah.
They ignore symptoms. You have to stay conscious and focused in on how your whole experience.
Yeah.
And then whatever tools you're using, there's many, many different tools. So, all this could be argued either way. I can, even in the midst as I say these things, I have my own little facts in my head that I can argue with myself about it. But it's definitely, moderation historically has always been
a lot more fun. That's what you're going to say.
That's what I was going to say.
You're going to say fun.
Well, definitely, certainly a way to expand and extend your experience in your life.
Yeah.
Are you liking what you're hearing? Do you want to hear more? Do you want others to benefit from this great content? If you want to ask us a question, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. You can find links to all our social media channels on basically everything on Linktree and Longevity Protocol Pod. If you want a little bit more about our personal lives, please follow us on Instagram at the Sex Docs. Here's where you can comment, ask questions that we directly address in our videos. Be sure to subscribe to our Substack. We're really building up the Substack more and more with all of our great content, all the notes here about what we went over today. And finally, if you're ready to make a change in your health and you want to see us as a new patient right here in Scottsdale, Arizona, please inquire through our private practice website, hormone-zone.com.